Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I want to quickly mention that we do have.
在我们开始之前
I'm sorry, can you please mute? I want to let everyone know that we have simultaneous translation in Mandarin and Spanish. Now we can go. Okay, so first off, I want to thank everyone for being here. Good
Christina,
morning.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Now we have to do this in consecutive so that then you start the interpreting function. Let us say it first here in the main room.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Buenos días, muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí con nosotros. Solo para avisarles antes de empezar, antes de la introducción, que tenemos servicios de interpretación al español y al mandarín. Para iniciar esa función en unos momentos, por favor, lo primero que tienen que hacer es hacer clic en el icono de globo o de 3 puntos suspensivos y ahí seleccionar su idioma, sea el español o el mandarín. Gracias. Margaret?
Thank you. 欢迎你们参加我们三板跳的将来的城市计划的workshop 我们现在今天呢先做一个 introduction， 先做一个简单的介绍，然后呢我们会分成小组去讨论一下接受你们的意见。多谢你。
Thank you. Now if we could start the interpreting function, please. Thanks.
Joanna. Okay, thank you. Now we can go. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this Saturday to talk about our General Plan 2040 update. My name is Christina Horsberger. I am with the City of San Mateo. I'm the director of the Community Development Department. That is the department that oversees the future of San Mateo in terms of the growth and change that can happen there. And that's what we want to talk to you about today. Joanna Jansen is one of our general plan experts from PlaceWorks, and she's going to get us started. She will give you an overview of the general plan and the 2040 update, which is our vision for the community for the next 20 years. She will let you know what we've done so far in our update effort, and she will talk to you about our activities for today. We have a great team of city staff and PlaceWorks here today to help us get through today's activities. And so thanks again for joining us. And with that, I will hand it over to Joanna.
Great. Thanks so much, Christina. Hi, everyone. Welcome and good morning. Thank you for sharing a beautiful Saturday morning with us. I appreciate you being here. And I'm going to share my screen now and walk you through a brief presentation. So Christina welcomed you, introduced herself and me, Joanna from PlaceWorks. We're going to do this a little bit different than the agenda. If you have the agenda, you might notice a difference here. I am going to go ahead and do the presentation first because when we held this workshop, the same workshop on Thursday night, we noticed that during the presentation, a lot of people joined us. So we want to wait and do our polling when we have a more kind of full house here and we can know who's with us. So I'm going to give you a presentation. At the end of my presentation, we're going to ask you and the others in the meeting some questions about who you are and what's your interest in joining us today. Then we'll have time for some clarifying questions about the presentation and about this process. And the majority of our time today is going to be spent in the breakout rooms. And we're going to go over the alternatives in some detail with you. I'll say more about how that'll work towards the end of this presentation. And then we're going to wrap up and adjourn, not by 8:30 p.m., but by noon today and let you get on with your Saturday. So our goals today are to provide an inclusive and informed dialogue about potential future changes in San Mateo, as Christina mentioned, to develop a shared sense of possibility for the future, to review and comment on the range of draft land use alternatives, and to understand that this is one step and one source of input into a larger and longer process. First, what is the general plan? The general plan is a very important and very powerful document because it guides future growth and development decisions. Its chapters or elements cover land use and circulation in the city, as well as urban design, open space conservation, safety, and many other critical issues. The general plan sets the overarching direction for the city, and this direction is then further implemented through specific plans, which are kind of like small little detailed general plans for individual areas of San Mateo, as well as the zoning code, which regulates how buildings, landscaping, parking, and other features are developed on individual sites. The general plan is not the same as the zoning code. The zoning code really is an important tool for translating the vision and the policies and the ideas that are established in the general plan into buildings. The general plan is guided by a vision statement and values that were developed with extensive community input. This general plan that we're working on together here today is intended to guide San Mateo towards being a vibrant, livable, diverse, and healthy community that respects the quality of its neighborhoods, fosters a flourishing economy, is committed to equity, and is a leader in environmental sustainability. That vision is supported by values of diversity, balance, inclusivity, prosperity, and resiliency. This is the vision and the values that the general plan should embody and uphold. Let's look at where we are now in this process and what's next. This timeline shows two important and related projects that are happening simultaneously right now in San Mateo. One, the orange or gold bar on the top is the general plan. That's what we're talking about today. The step that we're in right now is finalizing the draft alternatives. And then in the second half of 2021, we'll begin the process of evaluating those alternatives and creating a preferred scenario. I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. Then over the course of 2022, we'll turn the preferred scenario and the draft goals, policies, and actions into a draft general plan that will be accompanied by an environmental impact report, and both of those documents will be out on the street for public review for several months. Right now, we're looking towards adoption of the general plan in late 2023. So as you can see, we still have over 2 years of your input into this process, and we will take each one of these steps very deliberately with lots of community engagement. The other project shown on this timeline is the housing element. That's the green bar at the bottom of the timeline. The housing element is a required section of the general plan, and it provides policies and programs to ensure that San Mateo can accommodate housing for all members of the community at all income levels. So the housing element is legally a part of the general plan, but the two projects are on parallel but separate tracks because the housing element must meet state-imposed deadlines for adoption by the end of 2022. Now, who gets to participate in these foundational decision-making processes in San Mateo? The entire community gets to participate in the general plan. The general plan is an opportunity to understand who's in our community and to build and strengthen that community to enable all of us to solve problems together. San Mateo includes many different kinds of stakeholders who all have an interest in the general plan update. That includes people who live here, whether they rent or own, people who own businesses here, people who own property here, people who develop projects here. Everyone who lives, works, or plays here is a stakeholder in the general plan process. And we understand that to be successful, it is vital that the general plan reflect the many different voices in San Mateo. Over the past 3 years, since this project started back in 2018, we have worked very hard to meet people where they are, not only at community workshops like this one or the ones we used to have in person, like you can see here on the slide, but through many different methods of communication, including pop-up events, intercept surveys where we meet people on the sidewalk, meetings and interactions in Spanish and other languages. Last month, we did a citywide mailing to every address in San Mateo, and I hope some of you are here today because of finding out about this meeting in that mailer. Through these efforts so far, we've had interactions with over 3,000 individuals, and we've accumulated over 4,000 comments that have shaped each step of the process. Through that feedback, some consistent themes have emerged for us. So what we've heard from you so far is that many people are very concerned about traffic congestion and traffic safety on the roadways, a lack of affordable housing in San Mateo, the need for transit improvements, as well as improvements to sidewalks and crosswalks and street lighting to make walking safe in neighborhoods, being able to find convenient parking, and the important role of community events, activities, and parks in supporting a vibrant community life in San Mateo. So the three alternatives that we're going to be looking at today reflect a range of different ideas about how to respond to these issues that we've heard so far. Let's turn specifically to the alternatives process. The alternatives process is a very important step in the general plan update because it's how we guide decisions about changes to the land use map and circulation system. As you heard earlier, the general plan land use map provides the overall guidance for what can be built where, and it sets the groundwork for regulations in the zoning ordinance, the zoning code, and other documents that determine how San Mateo will look and feel. Every individual parcel of property in San Mateo has a color on the general plan land use map. That's the map that you see on the right side of the screen with the different colors on it. The colors determine what can and cannot be built on that property. Might be your property, might be the property next door to you. So this map is very important. The land use alternatives are our tool for exploring and evaluating potential changes to this map before any decisions are made. When we entered shelter in place in March 2020, the general plan update was in the midst of a series of community workshops and public meetings to identify a range of land use and circulation alternatives. We started choosing study areas, we started by choosing study areas, identifying where we want to focus consideration of potential changes. The study areas are most likely to change or best able to accommodate new development because they have the best access to transportation, services, and infrastructure as compared to other parts of San Mateo. After lots of community input over the summer and fall of 2019, the City Council gave direction on these 10 study areas. And then in further community input in the fall and winter of 2019, we created a range of alternatives for each one of those study areas. And in spring 2020, we were really excited to roll these out and take the 3 draft alternatives A, B, and C to the community. And then shelter in place happened, and we paused public meetings as for the general plan update to respect the health orders. Then in January 2021, we felt ready to restart engaging through virtual meetings like this one. We took those 3 alternatives back to the City Council. The council confirmed that they are valid basis for moving forward and continuing this conversation and restarting the community input process. And then so the next step in the process is going to be to evaluate and compare the 3 alternatives. And I'll say more about that in the next slide. Based on that evaluation, we will then work through a series of community meetings, general plan subcommittee, planning commission, and city council meetings to formulate a preferred scenario that's based on mixing and matching the pieces of these alternatives that work best. So we don't pick one entire citywide alternative, but we can pick the parts that work best from each one of the alternatives based on the findings of the evaluation. And that will become, that preferred scenario that we create through that mixing and matching process will become the updated land use map and recommendations for improvements to the future transportation network. At each step of the alternatives process so far, we have been through a round of community input, general plan subcommittee input, planning commission input, and city council review and direction, and that will continue. So currently, we're going to be working with you to finalize these alternatives for evaluation. And then when we get to the evaluation stage, that evaluation will consider a number of topics that are very important to San Mateo stakeholders, including what you see listed here on this slide. The evaluation will shed significant light on the pros and cons of each alternative. So we're not here today to choose among the alternatives or pick our favorite alternative or say what will and won't work about these alternatives. That process is all going to be much better supported when we have the information from this alternatives evaluation. And just to be clear, no decision about the alternatives or choosing among them is going to happen until the evaluation is complete. So we're here today to get your input on whether this is the right range of alternatives to evaluate. And again, the step of debating the pros and cons of these alternatives is a very important step, and it's going to come in the next stage of the process. So these three maps show the land use alternatives side by side. Obviously, you can't read them at this scale, but we're going to walk you through them study area by study area to help you understand and provide feedback. I did want to note that, so on these maps, the areas that you see that are colored in are the 10 study areas. And that's the building blocks where we focused our ideas about change to create the three alternatives. But areas outside of these 10 study areas are covered by the general plan, and they can and will see change over the 20-year life of the general plan. So for example, significant recent changes in state law have made it much easier to build accessory dwelling units or ADUs or in-law units. And so one thing that we expect to see happen in single family neighborhoods, which are some of the areas outside of the study area, is that many new ADUs are likely to be built over the next 20 years. Within the 10 study areas, the alternatives have different possible land use categories. Those are the colors on the map, and I'll explain those in just a sec. And those different land use categories translate into different potential amounts of growth, and in particular, different amounts of residential growth. Alternative A includes about 10,900 new homes. Alternative B includes about 15,800 new homes. And alternative C includes about 20,800 new homes. Again, this is over a 20-year time frame of the general plan. All three of the alternatives, as you can see on the bottom row, include around 15,000 new jobs, so they're kind of consistent in that rate. We did ask our economist on the general plan team to help us consider the potential changes in housing and employment patterns over the next 20 years as a result of the COVID pandemic. And we feel that this over the 20-year life of the general plan, economic and social and other conditions will fluctuate so that the effects of the COVID pandemic, while we feel them very strongly right now, over 20 years, this will still be a valid benchmark for planning for the general plan effort. And I also wanted to touch on questions about Measure Y up front. Measure Y, as I'm sure you know, was passed by San Mateo voters in November 2020. It extended height and density limits on new residential development, and it has a sunset date of 2030. This general plan looks out beyond that to the year 2040. And so some of the ideas in these alternatives do explore land use categories that would allow buildings with 6 or more stories, particularly in study areas 3 and 4 near the Caltrain stations. If the community and decision makers working together craft a preferred land use scenario that includes heights and densities above what would be allowed by Measure Y, then the city will need to ask voters to approve any changes to implement those components prior to the sunsetting of Measure Y in 2030. We also have 3 possible circulation alternatives. And our circulation alternatives are not broken down by study area because we really want to look at the transportation network holistically as a citywide system. All of the alternatives do assume pedestrian and bicycle improvements consistent with adopted city planning documents. And any of these 3 circulation alternatives could be tailored to be layered on top of and integrate with the preferred land use scenario. I'm just going to briefly go over the circulation alternatives, and we have a session specifically devoted to these to dive into them in more detail. So alternative A prioritizes pedestrian improvements, and it would implement traffic calming and safety improvements near highway on-ramps. This alternative also includes a 2-block pedestrian-only street downtown. Alternative B is focused on increasing and improving transit access to and from the Caltrain stations in particular by focusing on east-west transit connections to the Hillsdale Caltrain station. It would also prioritize dedicated bus lanes and high occupancy vehicle lanes and add bus rapid transit or BRT improvements to El Camino. And again, we can say more about these in the breakout sessions. And so then alternative C would kind of combine the improvements from A and B, focus on creating a pedestrian car light space downtown, and also explore emerging technology solutions like an autonomous vehicle shuttle that might help connect people to transit within city limits. So I am going to now spend a few minutes talking about what we're going to do in our breakout rooms so that you're prepared for that. So we have the schedule for the breakout rooms. You don't have to memorize the schedule. When you get into a breakout room, you're just going to stay there, and teams are going to come into your room kind of one at a time according to this schedule, and explain a set of study areas or the 3 circulation alternatives to you. And then you'll have an opportunity within your room to provide us with feedback and offer your ideas. Remember, we're here today to explore whether or not this is the right range and to capture any ideas that aren't already reflected in the alternatives that we've developed so far. We also will have a breakout room in Spanish. And if you're in the Spanish speaking breakout room, your team will orient you to cover all of the 10 alternatives and the circulation alternatives in Spanish. Your team will include a note taker who's capturing your ideas, and your facilitator will be sharing their screen to walk you through the materials. So when we start the breakout rooms in a little bit, it'll be easiest for you to follow along if you are able to look at the screen. So you don't have to open anything, but let's talk about some of the materials that your facilitator is going to be showing using the screen share feature on Zoom, just like I'm doing right now. One of them is going to be the land use alternatives maps. So when you look at this map, you see a lot of different colors. You probably don't know what the heck all those colors mean. So I'm going to walk you through each one of those colors and the corresponding land use categories right now, so you have a little bit of familiarity with this. And we can go over this again in the breakout rooms if you need a little bit of a refresher. The colors and the land use categories are explained on something that we call the place types menu. And the menu has words and pictures that explain what kinds of development might happen corresponding to each one of the colors used on the land use alternatives map. We're going to put a link to the place types menu in the chat for you in your breakout room. So you'll have access to it there. And it was also part of the materials that were emailed to you with the link for this meeting. But again, you can open this on your own if you choose to, but it's also available through your facilitator. So let's go through the categories and the colors on the map. So residential categories, when you see colors on the map that are yellow, orange, or brown, those are housing, new types of homes that might be anything from residential low, 1, 2, or 3 stories, all the way up to residential high, 8 stories or higher. And so in general, in all the categories that I'm going to talk about, the darker color means greater intensity. Intensity usually translates into density or height. So kind of the lighter orange is the less intense residential, and the dark brown is the more intense residential. Similarly, for mixed use, we have the same categories: low, medium, and high. From light blue to darkest blue, same break in the heights. Low is 1 to 3 stories, medium is 4 to 7 stories, and high is 8 stories. For commercial categories, this is different colors of pink and red for different types of commercial uses. So the bright red is your neighborhood stuff, like your restaurants, bars, gyms, nail salons, dry cleaners, that kind of stuff. The pink is commercial service. This is where you get your car fixed, where you take your pet to the hospital, self-storage units. Commercial service is pink. And then commercial regional, which is on my screen at least kind of more like a brick red. That is your large shopping centers like Hillsdale Mall or out of Bridgepoint Shopping Center, for example. The office categories, the kind of pure office uses, are more purple and lavender. So when you see purple on the map, those are office buildings. Again, low 1 to 3 stories, medium 4 to 7 stories, and high, the darkest purple, is 8+ stories. Industrial categories, we have 2. Those are the gray colors on the map. Darker gray is more of your traditional light industrial, might be more like a warehouse type of building, a building or a site where some manufacturing takes place, distribution facilities, that kind of thing. And then the lighter gray is more kind of 21st century research and development type of uses. That might be a building that includes both offices and laboratories or maker spaces. And that could be up to 3 stories. And then finally, the green on the map and the green circle with the P inside represent different types of parks and open space uses. So the P in a circle represents what we as planners call publicly accessible but privately owned open space. And that's a place that might be built as a part of new development, like a lawn or a plaza or a gathering area. That can serve both the residents or the tenants of that new development, but is also open to the public. So just a quick note, you did again receive these materials in the email that you got with a link to this meeting, and all of the materials we're looking at today are available on the website at strivesanmateo.org under the workshops and pop-up events page. So let me give you some examples of feedback that's helpful to us, which again, we really appreciate your generosity in sharing it. We're trying to figure out whether or not this is the right range of alternatives. So if you see an idea of the parcel that, or a place in the alternative that maybe it's residential on 2 of the alternatives, and you'd like to see an alternative that explores mixed use instead of residential, that's a great suggestion for a way to change one of the alternatives so that we broaden or increase the range that we're examining in the evaluation. Similarly, you might look at the 3 alternatives and say, in this study area, none of the alternatives really include a research and development option. None of them include a mixed use option. I would like to see an option that includes more high density housing in one of the 3 alternatives for this study area. That's really helpful for us because it helps capture a new idea that's not in the range of 3 alternatives right now. I know many of you will have an impulse to say, ooh, I like alternative A best, or I think alternative C is going to work great. Oh, that's a great place for housing right there next to the station. That input is valuable, but it doesn't help us change or refine the range of alternatives. And you're going to be able to offer that input in an even more informed way after we do the evaluation and have and share it with you. At the bottom here is just a logistical note. We're going to be capturing your feedback today based on chat. You're going to have the option, and when we did this meeting on Thursday, most people seemed most comfortable offering their input via the chat function. But please understand that your facilitator and your note taker might be sharing their entire screen and not able to see the chat window, and or they're paying really close attention to what you're saying and taking notes, so they can't also read the chat at the same time. So each breakout room is going to have a chat manager, and that person's going to name themselves "Chat to Me" in all caps. So when you want to submit a comment by chat, please chat to the person or the option on your screen that says "Chat to Me." That will make sure that the right person's getting your comment to help make sure that it's conveyed to the group. We don't want your comment to go unseen if it gets sent to anybody else. Just very briefly here to wrap up, if you have additional comments on the alternatives, or you have friends and neighbors who weren't able to be here today, we also have an online survey at strivesanmateo.org where you can give input on each individual study area and the circulation alternatives at your own pace and level of detail. So if you feel like you have more feedback after this meeting, please do the survey. You can fill out responses for one single study area. You can fill out responses for every study area. The circulation alternatives are on there. Right now we're planning that this survey is going to be live at least until May 2nd, but we're willing to extend that if we need to based on demand. So strivesanmateo.org, this is the landing page of that website right now. It'll take you straight to the survey. And finally, before we start our conversations, just some guidelines that we want to offer you to support friendly and productive conversations during the breakout rooms. We're really grateful to you for, again, sharing your Saturday morning with us. And we want to make sure that everyone who is kind enough to do that feels welcome and respected and included. So these are just some guidelines that we offer to support that. And again, if we run out of time during the conversation or you think of additional ideas, please do the survey online at strivesanmateo.org. Before we do questions, I am going to stop sharing, as I mentioned earlier, so that we can take a second and hear from you about who's here, and then we'll come back to this and answer your questions. So to submit, oh, hang on. Yeah, Lindsay, we're going to launch the poll.
Okay.
So we're just going to spend about 2 minutes here with this poll. We have a few questions for you to understand who's here with us today and what's motivating you to join the general plan process. And we also are very interested to understand more about how you heard about this meeting and how you would like us to keep in touch with you in the future. And part of these questions is very much to figure out who is here with us. And we're also really interested to get more clarity on who's not here and how we can do a better job of really reaching out to a diverse cross section of San Mateo. So I'm going to give everybody about another minute because I know there's a few different questions here and we have several options for you to choose from. And then after we close the poll, we'll take just a minute and share the results. And while you guys do that, I'm going to give myself a swallow of water. I see from the videos that people are very intently studying these questions. Want to make sure that we get it right. Thank you for that. Just a few more seconds and we'll close the poll, talk about what we see, and then move on to answer some of your questions. I know not everybody might want to vote.
Joanna, I just got a recommendation that we remind people to scroll down the survey because there's more than 2 questions.
Okay, well, hopefully you all just heard that reminder, but I'll repeat it. There are 4 questions on this poll. So if you use the little dark gray scrolling bar over on the right, you can scroll down and see all of them. We'll give folks a couple more seconds just in case not everybody saw that at the start. Thanks for the reminder. All right, Lindsay, I'm not seeing our responses go up, so why don't we go ahead and close for now? Thank you. So we got about 85% of the folks in the meeting responded, so thank you very much. So let's see who's here today. Is this your first time joining us for a general plan event? About 39% are here for the first general plan meeting. That's awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And we hope that you will come to more of these events in the future. And others of you are old hands at the general plan process. So thanks for your ongoing commitment. We really appreciate it. About 61% of people have been to a general plan meeting before. 95% of people identify themselves as a resident of San Mateo, and another quarter or 25% work here. This question you could answer more than one for however many of these categories fit you. A few people who own a business, 5%, and 63% who own property. Some people are visitors or customers of San Mateo businesses, about 8%. 8% are representative of a homeowners association, and 11% represent neighborhood or community groups, and another 11% are representatives of other types of organizations. Most folks learn about today's presentation from email newsletters, 68%. That's the largest category. Next, most common way to learn about this event was through social media or through a homeowners association. And then fewer people learned about it from the Daily Journal or from another group. But 24% also learned about this meeting by word of mouth. So thank you very much to those of you who are helping us spread the word about these events. And we'd love for you to continue to do that. And for folks who want to stay in contact, 92% of people say that the best way to keep them informed is through email newsletters, but people also get their information from social media, from homeowners associations, and from the Daily Journal. So thank you very much for this. This is really helpful to us to learn a little bit more about who you are, who's here today, and also how we can make sure that we stay in contact. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the results now. And we'll go back to the questions. I just want to share my screen briefly to make sure that everybody knows how to use the chat function, because we're going to be using the chat function to submit questions. So if you want to do that, use the chat button across the bottom of your screen. And then please send your questions to Carrie. Her name for this meeting is Project Questions. That goes to Carrie Stone, who is my colleague at PlaceWorks and the project manager for the general plan update from the consulting team. So please use the chat functions to send your questions to Carrie. Project Questions is what you want to be looking for. And Carrie will then read us your question so that we can respond. So go ahead and get those questions in, and let's see what we can do. And what we'd like to do is really focus on anything I can clarify from the presentation, anything that you want to understand better about the alternatives or about this process or about our meeting today. But we'll answer as much as we can.
All right, the first clarifying question is, what does FAR mean?
Okay, sure. You might have seen the acronym FAR on the place types menu, and FAR stands for floor area ratio. So it's much easier to explain in pictures than in words, but it's the idea that an FAR it determines how much of the building, it's a relationship of both the site coverage and the height of the building. So if you saw on the place types menu that some of the categories have an FAR of 1.0, that means that the footprint of the building is allowed to be either the entire width of the or size of the site, 1.0 relationship between the footprint of the building and the footprint of the site, or the building could take up half of the site, but then it would be 2 stories tall. So the total square footage of the building would be a 1-to-1 relationship with the square footage of the site. So higher FARs in general are going to be taller and larger buildings.
If zoning is not part of the general plan, then why do the proposed maps label residential, commercial, and mixed-use buildings?
Sure. So zoning and general plan designations are different, but they both regulate the type of development that can happen. So a general plan designation might talk about residential development at a certain density, and that's actually the basis for the zoning designation that then gets assigned to that site, which maybe goes into then more detail about not only whether or not it can be a residential building and at what density, all of that's in the general plan, but then the zoning designation adds to that with more information about how far that residential building can be from the lot line, how tall the fence can be around the residential building, what kind of lighting it needs to have, where the trash enclosures go. All of that much more detail is in the zoning, but both the general plan and the zoning work together to establish and be consistent about the overall type or category of land use that's allowed on the parcel.
Can a commercial property be rezoned for residential only during redevelopment?
I think this is a question about how could we change a land use on an individual parcel. So certainly separate from the general plan update process, there is a legal process that allows a property owner to request that the general plan designation or the zoning designation on their property is changed. And that's an amendment process. So property owners are allowed to submit that application, but in considering making a change that's not consistent with existing city regulations, the city has the discretion to allow or to deny that change. So there is a process to request the change, but it's not necessarily guaranteed that the property owner would be allowed to make that change.
How will the general plan adapt if the population, jobs, or other projections don't occur over the life of the general plan? And I have a related question that says, could we please see the details of the evaluation that concluded that over 20 years, current trends in jobs and population will smooth out and conform to the projections in the presentation? What were the assumptions used?
Sure. I think to answer that last question, that's something that we'll provide more information about in the evaluation to explain the projections that are used and the basis for those projections. In terms of what will happen if those projections aren't met, this update process, as you can tell, is a pretty intensive years-long effort to really take a big picture look at San Mateo and at its likely future. But you know, as we all know, and as we've all experienced very profoundly in the past year or so, we can't always know what's coming next. Things certainly can and do change over time in ways that are very difficult to predict. So there's always flexibility to adjust the general plan, to revisit its assumptions, to go through community-led processes like this one, to ask about whether projected land, whether allowed land uses should be tailored to reflect existing conditions. It takes a lot of effort, and it's not something that the city would undertake lightly, but it's always a possibility. And I'm sure that could be revisited if external conditions called for that.
I did another projections question, clarifying what they mean. Are the net new homes, populations, job projections the total possible if every zone was redeveloped to the maximum allowed, or are they the realistic projections based on past redevelopment?
Great question. And this is also something that we can explain a little bit more in the evaluation report. But this is kind of related to the question of, do the colors on the map assume, or do those numbers that I showed you assume that every single parcel inside the study area is, you know, bulldozed and developed to the maximum? No, that is not the assumption. We know that not every single one of these parcels inside of every single one of these study areas is going to dramatically change over the next 20 years. And when we put a color on the land use map, it doesn't force anything to happen. Nothing is going to change on a given parcel just because the color on the land use map changes from yellow to blue. But what it does is create the possibility for something different to be there in the future. So of course, many other factors have to come into play. The property owner has to be interested in changing. The economics of the change have to make sense. But if those things happen, then the general plan land use map says, if you're going to change, here's what we would like to see in the future. It doesn't force that change to happen. And these projections do not assume that every single parcel is going to change.
Great. Is affordability for residential taken into account within the residential category? Also, residential might include lots of units, but not units suitable for families. Are those subcategories too granular at this phase? Short answer is yes. The housing element that I mentioned, that is the separate effort going on right now. That's a really important tool to look much more specifically at affordability levels and at the types of units that are going to be built. Right now, as you can tell from your place types menu, this is really focusing on kind of the look and feel of the buildings that will house the units, rather than on the affordability of the units that are in that building. We would anticipate a mix of affordability,
And sometimes that affordability is directly connected to the size of the units or how they're built. But these categories do not include any specific information about affordability. And that would come through the housing element process and other city regulations.
What happens at the edges of general plan of zoning areas, such as commercial next to residential? Is there a mid-use?
So you might see some places in the study areas where the colors on the map are a little bit lighter or paler around the edges of a study area, especially where those edges are next to uses that currently are at lower heights or lower densities. So that certainly can happen. And another very important key there is thinking about city requirements, which again, probably are most likely going to come through zoning code that require various types of buffering or landscaping within a given parcel to screen it or buffer it from adjoining uses.
And this is the last question I have in the queue. Can empty office space be converted to housing, since many people will continue to work from home and businesses are downsizing and need less office space?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that what I can say about that from the perspective of the land use alternatives is that if you look at these maps, excuse me, especially in alternatives B and C, which as you saw had our highest numbers of residential growth, you will see that a lot of places that are currently office buildings today in San Mateo are designated for residential development at some type of intensity. So we do anticipate that that type of conversion will happen over time. And that's what's anticipated in these land use alternatives.
One more question trickled in. Has county service availability, such as health services and especially mental health services, been considered?
Great, another good question. And it's a kind of thing that we are interested in taking a look at in the evaluation at public health differences or different possible public health outcomes as a result of these alternatives, or the different scenarios that we're looking at is something that we know the community is very interested in. And so we're going to see what data is available about the differing service levels. And that goes for other things too, like school capacity or police and fire services, and the ability of not only the county public health system, but also city services to serve the future development that's contemplated in these three alternatives. So that is good to hear that you're interested in learning more about that as part of the evaluation.
That's all I have right now.
Okay.
Oh, one more, maybe this will be the last one. Can an overlay be added to the map to indicate parcels that have been recently developed are approved for development? Simply,
oh, thanks. Yeah, sorry, did I interrupt? Go ahead.
No, well, simply having the various color might be misleading on what is developed.
Right, yeah, thank you. We did look carefully at projects that are pending and approved. So as your facilitator walks you through these study areas and the alternatives, you will notice that across many of the three alternatives, the parcels, some of the parcels are the same across all three. And in some cases, that's because there is an approved project or a project that's under construction. And so we would not expect that parcel to change again in the next 20 years. If something's just been approved there or something's being built there now, that's probably most likely going to be there 20 years from now. So we don't think it'll change. So we've kept it the same across all three alternatives. So those parcels are not necessarily indicated individually on these maps because we have a lot of information that we want to try to use these maps to convey. But we definitely did take that into account when creating the three alternatives. And I think with that is probably a good idea to go ahead and start the breakout room discussions. So in just a minute, I'm going to ask Lindsay to move everyone into the breakout rooms. And so for those of you who are participants, again, once you get in your breakout room, you can just chill and we will come to you. We will bring our teams to you one by one over 4 sessions. They'll share their screen and they'll walk you through the alternatives. So And you'll also have your chat manager. Again, please remember, it's so helpful to us if you can chat to the chat to me person in your breakout room. That's your chat manager, and their job is to make sure that they're seeing and capturing your chats. In addition, just to let you know, this meeting right now is being recorded. Your breakout rooms will be recorded, and the chat logs for the meeting are all going to be downloaded and be part of the record for the meeting. So we are capturing everything in addition to the notes that your note taker is taking. And with that, Lindsay, if you could put us all into our breakout rooms, and I hope you guys have a great time. So go ahead and hit the blue join button on your screen when you see it. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much. I hope that those were productive conversations for you. All of the breakout rooms that I had the opportunity to participate in were full of great ideas, really thoughtful conversation, and very informed input from you. And so I really appreciate it. What we've heard from you today is definitely going to help us refine these alternatives and add value to the next stages of our process. So again, I'm very grateful to you for sharing your time and your ideas with us this morning. Just a few more minutes here before we let you go to enjoy the rest of your Saturday. I do want to share my screen one more time so that I can tell you a little bit about the next steps and our upcoming meetings. So just a second, please. Let me do that. Okay, and then I'm going to navigate to the end of our presentation here, which is right here. So again, we have an online survey at strivesanmateo.org. Leads you through very similar type of information as you saw today on the land use alternatives and the circulation alternatives, and is an opportunity for you or your friends and neighbors to provide us with as much or as little additional feedback as you like at your own pace. At any time throughout this process, if you have questions or comments for us about the general plan, please send them to us at generalplan@cityofsanmateo.org. And then finally, we have several more upcoming meetings, even just in April and May, that are either about the general plan process or about related efforts. So I want to make sure you know about those. Next Saturday, there's going to be, I'm sorry, that's today. That's this Saturday. We did that one. Congratulations. Thursday, next meeting is Thursday, April 22nd in the evening. That is a meeting to talk about the regional needs allocation, or RENA. So if you're interested in learning more about the city's requirements to meet housing needs, that is a great workshop for you, Thursday at 6 p.m. The following week on Tuesday at 6 p.m., another housing element meeting. This is more of an overall introduction to the housing element meeting. We've had a couple of those so far. This is the third similar meeting, just to orient people to what's happening when we talk about the housing element. So if you're curious to learn more about that, that's Tuesday, May 4th. On Monday, May 17th, we're going to be taking a status update to the City Council, just letting them know what's going on with the general plan. No decisions, no action is going to be taken at that meeting, but we're just giving them a status update. And no decisions on these alternatives is what I mean. And then Tuesday, May 18th is our general plan subcommittee meeting, where we're going to be telling them about what we have accomplished on the alternatives process, sharing your input with the general plan subcommittee and getting their feedback on this range of alternatives. And then looking out to June or July this summer, we'll be going to the Planning Commission and then to the council. And ultimately in July, the council will be giving us some direction on the range of alternatives so that we can go ahead and get started with the evaluation that we talked a lot about today. So that's what's coming up. Again, at the project website, strivesanmateo.org is where you can find more information about these meetings. You can find the documents that we shared with you today, and you can go there for regular updates and to sign up for our mailing list. And then just one final thing, we've asked a lot of you already, but we have one more request, which is if you would be kind enough to share your thoughts about this workshop today, you can take a quick photo of this QR code or go to this link, which we're going to put in the chat so that you can tell us how we did today and let us know how we can do better at future meetings. We really appreciate that. It's just a few more questions about your experience today and what feedback you'd like to offer us so that we can do better. We're always interested in improving. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I know that Christina has a few words that she wants to say.
Thank you, Joanna. I just wanted to wrap up by thanking everyone for taking this big chunk of time on your Saturday morning. It lets us know that you guys all think that this general plan update effort is as important as we do. And so we appreciate that. I want to give a special thanks to our team of facilitators, note takers, chatters, and everyone who was involved in this. They all worked really hard to bring this to you. And I think they did a great job. And so thanks to them and thanks to all of you. And we hope to see you at our next meetings. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks again.